Should we start again? Oh, hang on, and that's muted, and everything's muted. Brilliant. What a great start to our first stream of the year. Right, let's try that again. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had a good New Year's. I'm going back to bed. Yeah, I was just saying that I'm glad FPS has doubled there, AJ. That's a very good sign. It's not doubling on our test machine. So our 4GB 1050 Ti potato test rig is getting around about 15 FPS at the moment, and it was in the 30s, so I need to figure out why. And yeah, on the 24-hour stream, I found that actually, even though like 12 hours in, I was absolutely shattered and ready to go to bed, once I lifted my desk up and stood for the rest of the stream, I was actually quite energized. So I thought I'd try and do a standing stream tonight. I need to get used to standing up more anyway, rather than just lounging in my chair while I work. Yeah, so what are we doing? Yeah, Anasi, you make a good point actually. I was going to do departmental tasks, so do the tasks boards for each department. But yes, I was messing about with volumetric galaxy, so it would be interesting to give that a test. Yeah, see, I found that on the 24-hour stream because I was standing for about 6 hours of that stream in the end, and like I felt like weirdly like awake and energized. In fact, afterwards I didn't even go to bed. I stayed up for hours after the stream before finally collapsing. But yeah, right, so yeah, so I've been going through all the profiles and looking at the game thread and trying to work out what's going on. Like, there's a lot of NPC stuff happening somewhere down here. I can't find it now, but yeah, like NPC movement seems to be ticking quite a lot. See, there's a bunch of character movement stuff here, which is going to be the NPCs puffing about. So I just need to make sure that they are not like inflating the tick times too much. But yeah, I shall dig into that. Right, so that can go away. Yeah, I'm still getting weirdly low FPS when running the game in the editor. Obviously this is the full game, this isn't just my test map. But yeah, it's the game thread seems to be weirdly inflated in the editor. It's fine packaged, but yeah, I'm not quite sure why that is. So yeah, I've added a couple of test UI, well, just temporary UIs, just to add something to those screens. Obviously they'll be replaced with the actual UIs when we come to do those consoles. Yeah, mostly I've been working on optimization because, oh, speaking of optimization, the screen has gone. So this this timer on the window here, I had that set up originally as one giant widget. In fact, it still is currently. And the idea was I was going to actually overlay lots of data on the glass just using a widget. But the widget's like 8K by 2K. It's something crazy. And that's taking up like half a gig of VRAM with a render target. It's mad. So I'm condensing that down to just the timer. And I'll make the surround graphics and everything just as a static mesh instead. And any data we put on the screen, I'll have that as a separate small widget that's located in world space, rather than making the whole thing one giant widget, because that's just madness. And yeah, and basically every UI you see here, in fact, if I back up, you have a look at the UIs on those terminals, you can see that they've just disappeared. And what they're actually doing is they're not disappearing, they're collapsing to a single pixel. And I can adjust the view distances in which that happens. so we don't get pop-in. But the idea is that because they're collapsing to 1 pixel, it means that the reference in VRAM for that render target is also collapsing to 1 by 1 pixel. So it's using like basically no VRAM at all when that screen's not needed. If you hide the widget, it doesn't remove the amount of VRAM that it's using for the render target. So collapsing it to a single pixel seems to be the workaround for that. But I'm doing lots of little optimizations like that to try and manage our resource usage. Ah, thank you, Festus. Good to hear. Ah, happy birthday to your nephew, Binary. At some point, it would be nice to have all of these individual widgets that you can move around, and have like a drag and drop interface like a real operating system. I don't think we'll get to that point, but it's certainly nice as a final version of the system to aim for that. I guess we have a kind of a version of that in that we've got these pop-up windows for things like the surface map, and we'll certainly have more of that. So on here, where you click on these and you have like an infinitely long scrolling window here for all the data, I want this as a pop-out instead. So what you'll have is like where you've got this here popping out with the map, you'll have a much larger kind of informational overview of each target as a pop-out, rather than having to scroll up and down a list of text. Then we can put graphics on it and other stuff to make it look pretty. But yeah, that's where we're going with that. Yeah, potentially. I mean, if we're spawning them in as individual widgets, then we can certainly maybe have a grid system where you can choose where to put them. But yeah, something to look at for the future. It wouldn't be click and drag, but I want this in the top left might be something we could do at some point. Yeah, that's pretty much been it really. Just been optimizing. So, as Anasi pointed out, one of the things that I was fiddling with was having a volumetric galactic, a volumetric representation of the galaxy, so that when you fly up and away from the Milky Way, you can see the galactic disk down below you. So I was basically taking a plugin, volumetrics plugin, which I think was this one, and I was making my own materials for that, which I have obviously lost. Such is my way. Okay, where did I hide them? I'm guessing that's one of the things that didn't save when I had an engine crash, but no matter, because we can easily replicate that. So I think the level I was messing about with was possibly this one. Right, so this is a volumetric accretion disk, which we can use for whatever, and jet cones, again, which we can use for whatever. There is a bunch of stuff that we don't need, basically none of that. Okay, don't need that either. Basically, I was just pulling out the volumetric stuff we needed and then just dumping the stuff we don't need. Right, so that, and then we need a version of that only has the accretion disk, because basically I'm turning the accretion disk into the map of the Milky Way. Which one was I doing though? That's the question. I think it was this one. Let's just duplicate that a minute. Ah yeah, that was it. Right, so basically what we're doing is we're taking a 2D representation of the overall shape of the object, and then we are creating extra detail with volume texture, so just a volume noise texture. Then obviously we can mess about with that. So if I change the scale to 0, we end up with this much softer, smoother version of what is that shape. But if we replace this with the Milky Way, that one there, so what we're actually doing is we're taking the map of the Milky Way that we're using for the galaxy density map. So each pixel on here represents one sector of space. So this is 1,000 by 1,000 because we've got 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. So each pixel is one sector, 100 light years wide. So we know the density of each sector of space because it's driven by this 2D texture. So what we can do is use that same texture to then drive this volumetric effect. So it's a bit dim at the moment, but you can see you've got the central bar there of the galaxy and all the arms spiraling outward. So that's essentially a 3D version of that texture. I'm going to have to edit quite a lot of the source material because it does the opposite of what we need. So at the moment, if you look through it sideways, it gets brighter and then dims as you go looking at it top down. We needed to do the opposite of that. So when you're inside the galaxy, you don't want this bright band across the center of space. But what you do want is when you're above the galaxy, the further away from it you are, the brighter you want it to get. So we need to invert a bunch of that. It's actually even more than that. It's because we've got the galactic halo represented as well, and that goes out to about 150,000 light years. So I worked it out. It was something like 8 trillion sectors in total. It's a big number. Yeah, so the other thing we had to do... Of course, with this being a plugin, I don't know what half of these material functions actually do. But I did work out that this is definitely the one we want to use because it's got the halo, and we want to collapse the disk down to something which is obviously the right size for our galaxy. So you can see there it's already starting to look a bit like the Milky Way. So we need to make sure that we have the right scaling for the thin disk region, and obviously you've got the thick disk, which is the halo. So we need the visual volumetric representation to exactly match the actual physical stellar density that we're generating on the galaxy gen. So we'll have to fiddle and mess with a lot of this in order to get it to look right. But as a starter, we're starting to generate the galaxy. The other thing I had to do is get rid of some of the jitter, because you've got some like pixelated jitter there, and I got rid of that last time by basically zeroing out a lot of the wind, and we don't need that either. Yeah, because then you end up with a moving pattern, which we definitely do not want. Now, in order to make this an actual galaxy-sized object in the game world, we're basically cheating Parallax. So we need to render the object very, very slow, or move the object very, very slowly as the ship transitions through the galaxy. It's how we do nebulas and things. So the nebulas exist at a much, much bigger scale than the ship's movement. So because we move them so slowly, obviously you have the illusion of flying through something which is multiple light years wide. And we need to dial that up to 11 for the galaxy itself. So we're going to need an actor to represent the galaxy. And I think we'll make it a child of the base actor for this, because we need some of the functions that are in there. So if we just call it _Dan, so I know it's one that I've messed with. So we don't need that. We do need that. Because basically this is where we construct our volume material. So what's the one we just did? That one. Okay, so there's our Milky Way disk. Well, there it was anyway. So we need to make sure that like it turns and is a three-dimensional object, because we move space around the ship. So obviously the effect needs to move, and it needs to hold its rotation relative to space as we move it, which it is, so that's fine. The other thing it needs to do is manage scale, and that's where I was struggling with it, because the scale of the static mesh that houses the volumetric effect is not being used by the volumetric effect, and I did for our black holes. Managed to get that working nicely, but I can't remember how. Because obviously this one, in fact, if we drag that in, delete that. Right, so that's just the actor that's generating the effect. And again, scaling the size of the actor does nothing to the size of the effect, so it is linked to this. So we need to scale the geometric scale to match the size of the galaxy that we want it at the size of the parallax scale that we're working with. So there's going to be some math involved to trying to work out what the geometric scale needs to be to match. And I think we're lacking that on this one because we're using the base. I know. Was it hooked up? No, it's not hooked up. Yeah, so we're probably missing some scalar values. Yeah, it's probably these. So if we basically copy those values, should be able to get that scaling the way we want it. So we got 4 scalars. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, of course, it's a map, so you can't just make loads of them. So half height 1. Radius 1. So what I'm doing here is also going to benefit us for the jet cones on the neutron stars as well, because it's using the same base materials. Okay, so that's our scalars, and we also need some vectors as well, quite a few of them. Actually, can I just hang on a minute? Am I missing a trick here? Ha! Forgot I could do that. Okay, was that sufficient? Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we just need to work out the brightness part of the problem. I think what we'll do is we'll take the base material and mess it up, basically. Creation disk with Halo Voltex. Yeah, good point, AJ. Yeah, exactly that, Cloud. It's they are several kilometers across in terms of their real world scale, because they need to be quite big, because otherwise in VR you can hang on a second, let me fix the stream. That's because, Claire, when you were going through and setting the settings for the 24-hour stream, it updates that as the default. Hold up, I think I can fix that. Right, it should be public now. That would explain why there's only 24 people on stream. Yeah, so actually on that note, we have an issue with the 24-hour live stream in that YouTube will only allow up to 12 hours of live footage before it won't process. So it's stuck waiting to process because obviously it's a 24-hour stream. So we need to have a conversation with YouTube as to what we can do about that. We can't download it because there's no way of downloading it. It's still there, it shows as being there. You can click on it and it shows you the full timeline of the 24 hours, but we can't do anything with it. So hopefully they'll let us either trim it, in which case we might need to lose like the middle 6 hours of the stream, because if we're forced to cut it down to 12 hours, I'd rather have like the first 6 hours and the last 6 hours and just lose the middle, because like during the middle the view numbers like dipped right off anyway. So, and that was just me being mostly tired. But yeah, we'll see. They might manually process the full 24-hour stream, but we will see. Hopefully the fact we did it for charity means that it will appeal to their sense of reason. That's some dedication, Max. I wasn't there for the full 24 hours. Not mentally. I won't click it now because it'll probably break the current stream. But yeah, it's basically, it still says waiting to process rather than actually processing. So we're basically outputting our emissive, and yeah, we've got it set up as a post-process. Ideally, I want to move away from using the post-process domain for these effects and just do them as just standard surface emissives. I'm not quite sure why this plugin's set up to do post-process, but we'll run with it for now. But yeah, so I need to replace that with the other one. Sure that's still working. Alright, then we need to make sure that we some of the emissiveness fading at distance. Yeah, don't care about that, don't care about that. So what I'll do, not tonight, but I will go through and like strip out a lot of the stuff from this material function that's not actually needed for what we're using it for the galactic rendering. So we're using an artificial point light to light up the disk. What we don't want to do is render the point light at all. So we want to keep the volume of the disk like that without lighting it up. There's our thing. So on here, maybe if we just do some ambient light a minute, we can just see what we're doing. Which it's not going to do because it's post-process. Great. Wonderful. Yes, we definitely want like the clouds to be fairly dense. Like if you're looking through the galactic disk from the side, obviously it needs to be like a thick mass of dust. Probably for the halo as well, maybe not quite so much for the halo. That's weird. Why is it still showing that? Just going to oh, I see, doing it from there. Get everything reset back to white. So I guess the other thing we want to do is we'll want to colour this so that the arms are blue and the centre region is kind of a reddy colour because of the M-class overload that's going on there. Alright, at least we can see it from a distance now. And I think I want to overbright that just to... yeah, just so we can see it from further. Yeah, it's good that we've got dust banding through the middle there. Have a good one, CD5. So what I'll probably do for the bulge in the center is I'll have a secondary volumetric effect, which is just like the bulge in the middle, and have the two separate ones, because this will deal with the thick disk region. But yeah, it's not going to do much for the big bulge in the middle. Right, let's see what we end up with, because it's still not particularly visible. I'm assuming that's because of the post-process on here. Yeah. Yeah, small update on the demo. We're still planning to release as soon as all the bugs are fixed. That is still the main hold up. Although we're rolling 227 into the demo update as well, because we're about, I'd say at least 75%, if not more, done with 227. So it makes sense just to roll them out together. So you're getting 2 updates for the price of 1. Let's have a look at the scaling on this and see whether it gets dimmer. Yeah, basically yes it does. Right, and that will be because of the fake point light in the center only has a certain range on it. So we would need to sort that out in here. Actually, if we get rid of that, that half worked. basically I want to remove any usage of the point light. Because that's not how we want to light it. We want it to be constantly lit at all times. Exactly that, AJ. So basically, as you go up and away from the galactic disk, the idea is we want to be able to look down and see the galactic disk as a volumetric feature. And then as you obviously fly down into the galaxy, you're literally flying down, into the volumetric disk of the Milky Way. So the Milky Way should be visible at all times, and then from the perspective of Earth, which would be, where are we? About here. Yeah, so from Earth, looking towards the center of the galaxy, you'd want to see, obviously, the Milky Way, kind of like that, stretching around you. Obviously, we need to make sure that the dust and everything is properly occluding the center of the galaxy, and we don't want it to be all glowy like this. But you should be able to see the Milky Way from within the Milky Way, and then obviously as you fly out of the Milky Way, you should see space all around you. That be the plan. And obviously this is going to be a full volumetric space as well, because we'll also have like the Magellanic Clouds as well, represented in 3D. So as you're flying out of the Milky Way's disk to one of the Magellanic Clouds, you'll be able to kind of look down and see the whole Milky Way below you. It should be scary, just seeing the whole scale of everything. And also I want to do a skybox which contains like lots of other galaxies in the distance. So we want to make sure that Andromeda's on there in the distance, and there's another one as well that's quite close, I can't remember the name of. But it won't just be black like this, you'll actually see other galaxies in the distance, albeit very faint. But to be perfectly honest, there's not a lot more I can do with this at this point, without going through and picking through the code line by line, to try and work out which bits of it control the point lights fall off, because obviously it's still relying on that point light in order to light the disk, which is no good for us because we want it to be absolutely enormous. What I do like though, I like that it's casting a shadow, so the light from the center of the galaxy is obviously lighting up the inner edge of the galactic arms and shadowing behind them, which looks kind of cool. So we might want to retain that effect a little bit. Although that said, really they are supposed to be self-illuminated, because the reason that the galactic arms are blue is because there's a lot of new star birth going on in the galactic arms, and then in the galactic center obviously it's all sort of reddish colored because they're all very, very old stars. So the color of the regions is very much indicative of the age of the stars in those regions. So we need to make sure that we are true to science with that. So I'm going to leave that there. because yeah, there's going to be a lot of me just scratching my head digging through code, and that's not particularly entertaining to watch. So we will instead work on the tasks system and the tasks board for each department. But at least there's a small taster of what our galactic disk will eventually end up looking like, albeit prettier. So I think if we use our bridge playground for now, then what I'll do is I'll start creating all the jobs boards out here, just so we can see them all up close and all at once. No idea, David. Let's move that out the way over there somewhere. I need to put the side consoles on our test bridge now that we've decided where they're going. This is more about preparing those game systems, so I'll go over this in more detail when we do our yearly update very soon. But what I want to do is I want to really focus on gameplay for 2026. Obviously, we really want to go to early access in 12 months' time. So coincide early access with Christmas 2026, and we don't want to go to early access unless there's gameplay, actual things you can do to keep you occupied and entertained, rather than just logging on, looking at all the new stuff and logging off again. We want gameplay, something to keep you playing. And there's lots of things which are groundwork that need to be done in preparation for that. And being able to generate tasks on the fly and then have those tasks presented to both the NPCs and the players is one of the biggest systems we need to finish and polish. So I want to get a head start on that and start actually generating those task boards with those tasks that need doing. So we already started that on the 24-hour stream because we started making these task managers. And obviously the idea with the task managers is they are what dish out the tasks to the crew members of the ship. We've got our ship-wide orders one, which manages like what the ship as a whole is supposed to be doing. So obviously the first one we've implemented is explore a star system. So this is tracking the overall ship-wide objectives, whereas these are tracking departmental objectives. Or more specifically, crew member specific objectives. So each one of these needs to have an associated tasks board that actually starts listing what tasks are needed. There are going to be some specialist cases, like tasks that are for the bridge crew. Bridge crew tasks are kind of different in the sense that rather than say with an engineering task, a piece of hardware is broken, an engineer needs to go and deal with it. In the bridge scenario, there's only one of each person. So really it's like this bridge station needs to do this thing rather than someone in this department needs to go and do a thing. So there's definitely a separation between the two there. I'm currently undecided as to whether or not we have a bridge specific task manager. That might actually end up being the cleaner way of doing it in the long run, because when you're assigned to the bridge, then really you should be assigned to the bridge department so that you're being granted tasks specifically on the bridge, as opposed to the rest of the ship, which are all doing things within their area of the ship physically. Yeah, I think we'll definitely start with engineering because engineering's the easiest one, and will probably always be the easiest one because obviously you've got a physical ship, it has physical things that can break, and it's very easy to make tasks to go and fix and repair those things. That's kind of like the easy mode version of it. The harder one is things like the helm, or like the chef. There's going to be certain departments aboard the vessel where it's going to be a challenge to think of things to do. I guess like the captain or the XO are in that category. You can't really generate tasks for the captain because the captain is just captaining the ship. Other than go write a log or go look at a crew manifest for 10 minutes. There's nothing interesting we can give the captain to do. So, that's going to be an interesting one to try and find rewarding tasks for. And the XO is another one. Like, what's the XO doing all day? And we don't want them just, sat at a chair reading a log. We want something engaging and fun to do. Hey, quick as me. We are currently thinking about our task managers and how best to implement those. The more I think on it, the more I do like the idea of making the bridge its own department aboard the vessel, and then people drop in and out of that department as required. So if a random scientist is assigned to the sensors, then they are now in that bridge department rather than the science department. Yeah, that's probably the best way of doing it. And then we can have the bridge task list maybe as one of the available screens on here. So whilst you're sat in a command chair, you can see the tasks appearing and disappearing if you've got it on that mode. We'll probably need more screens than what we've got there. But tabs for the win. Right, so I suppose the first thing we need, I guess, be above and beyond what we've got here, I guess, is the actual tasks. So because the way I set this up, we've got a timer which is assigning the tasks. So we have an array of unassigned tasks, and we are physically pushing those, in this case, to the bridge stations themselves. Now, for tasks which we're not pushing to a bridge station, I guess those ones need to be pushed into a queue, which can then be claimed or assigned by whoever the department head is. Because I want to have a definite separation between the department head and the people in that department that are actually doing the tasks. So I want to have the department head to have the freedom to go and do tasks if they want to, but if they want to just sit at the desk in their office and just assign those tasks out, then they're free to do that too. So I don't want to put artificial barriers on what people can or cannot do, but at the same time, I do want the department heads to have that one additional ability above and beyond everyone else. So I think the way that looks in practice is that we'll have a physical tasks board which will list all the tasks, and then an NPC or a player can walk up to that tasks board and just cherry pick something to do. So there'll be like 12, 15 tasks, and they'll be like, I'll do that one, click it, assign it to themselves, go off and do the task. Whereas the department head can walk up to the task board and say, right, I'm assigning that to that person, I'm assigning that to that person, and at that point they've got no choice, they've been assigned a task to go and do rather than cherry picking one. That's just, it gives you that command oversight in that department if you want it. By default, people will just cherry pick tasks otherwise. Much like the real world. That's pretty much how it works. You cherry pick the easy task unless you get assigned something you don't want to do. So that kind of leans more into the bridge one being its own separate thing, because the bridge one needs to push those tasks to the bridge stations rather than a task board that needs to be assigned out. Because on the bridge, there's only one station really that's interested in doing that task. So it'd been handy in a way is if we even had maybe some kind of an alert on the station itself. Just trying to think of the smoothest, easiest way to handle this. Because we want players, for NPCs it's easy because you just give them a task and they do it, but players need to notice that there's a task. So I think when you're sat in that chair, then maybe we have something on the HUD that flashes up to say, you know, there's a task to do while you're sat there, or I guess while you're assigned to that role more specifically, because if you're up walking about, you still need to get that task to complete. I suppose that makes more sense than showing it on the actual UI, because it's not really like an in-universe relevancy. Like the things we put on the UIs in the game world need to be kind of like the simulated version of, you know, if this ship were real, how would it work? And we wouldn't have tasks popping up on that UI. That's more of a command thing where you'd be physically given a command to do. It's not something that would just pop up on a UI. So we need that middle step where we track tasks to do that are kind of personal to you, as in on your HUD, rather than on the UI screen, which is more, that's the ship's property. It's more relevant to the ship itself, not you personally. I think that makes sense. I think I've devolved into rambling, but yeah. I think I know what I mean. So yeah, I think after all that, we will combine these two, not tonight, but I will combine these two into a bridge task manager, because bridge tasks do need to be handled differently to departmental tasks. Yes, so we do need some kind of an analogy for voice tasks, voice commands within the game. So in an environment where you're not physically talking to the other person, we need a way of assigning tasks to that person in any situation. Like if you're playing multiplayer with friends, then you can literally just say to your friend, "Oi, do this," and they'll do it. But if it's just two random people in a random multiplayer game, and maybe neither of them have a mic, or they're not bothering to type chat into the chat box, there needs to be some UI way of issuing commands as the captain. So by looking over at the person that's assigned to the sensors, and then using the radial menu to assign them a job, they then get that on their HUD, so they know they've been given a task, and no one needed to speak to each other. But the task is still there, flashing at them to be done. Yeah, we're going to have a wrist device. So again, every crew member has like a little Bluetooth headset thing by their ear, which is what's projecting the HUD in front of their face. So it's like an AR thing. But on their wrist, they're like, you tap your wrist and then a screen will come up, which is being projected by the thing by your ear. So that works well in VR because we don't have to worry about making 3D menus for the VR players. So in VR, you lift your arm up, tap your wrist, and you've got a 3D screen you can interact with. In first person, you press a button, same thing happens. Wrist comes up, It's easy to say. Menu pops up, and then you can obviously interact with the menu. So the HUD will have like to do things appearing on it, like a little flashy, annoying thing. So if there's a task that's been assigned to you, it'll be flashing away on your HUD until you like dismiss it or accept it or whatever. We'll find a way which is smooth and as unintrusive as possible. Yeah, kind of like an Apple Watch, only it can make holograms via AR. So here's one I prepared earlier. Ignore what it says, that's obviously wrong. Yeah, so this is obviously before we fleshed out the other ones. Here it is. I'll call it Tasks Manager. Yeah, VR does work. I was messing about with it last night. Okay, so this is going to need a UI screen. These will be merged into a bridge one, and obviously they'll have their own separate ones as well. So yeah, so I guess you've got 3 classes of Task Manager. You've got the ship-wide one, the departmental ones, and a bridge-specific one. I don't think anywhere else on the ship is going to need a specific one. Just trying to think of all the different departments and how they work. So, okay, so medical, you're going to have NPCs coming in with injuries, and you'll have tasks pop up based on what those NPCs doing. So if an NPC comes and sits in the, I guess the intake lounge or whatever we do, then the task is going to be assigned to perform diagnostics on them, and then so on and so on. So those tasks are being generated on the fly depending on what those NPCs are doing. So that can all be done by a tasks board. I think the same is true for the cooking gameplay. That can just be a case of things are popping up as needed. Deck crew, probably similar. Engineering, definitely. Tactical, I think tactical is another one of those ones where it's difficult to come up with regular tasks for the tactical team, because for the most part there's nothing to shoot at on the ship. So other than doing a patrol or doing some target practice in the firing range, there's not a lot we can give them to do. I mean, we can have some NPCs getting to a fight, and then you got to go and split the fight up and things like that. But you know, unless it comes to actually doing away missions, tactical is going to be a difficult one. But similarly, it could have a tasks board, so that's fine for there as well. So yeah, I think the only environment where we need specific station directed tasks is going to be the bridge. We don't have room for an obstacle course unless we set one up on a corridor somewhere. Yes, tasks will definitely involve EVA, so a lot of stuff is going to be on the outside of the ship. So obviously I don't have much here because this is the test map, but yes, there will be, well, like, you know, the GPS dish on the roof, various sensor arrays, the weapons turrets. They're located on the outside of the ship, so you'll have to EVA to go and repair them on the outside, not on the inside. Oh, I needed a really long name to check how much text space we need. So I used the name of one of the SpaceX drone ships, which is, of course, I Still Love You, which comes from, I think it's M. Banks, his books, which I've never actually read. I don't have time for reading these days, sadly. Oh, Culture, that was it. It was the Culture series, yes, that's where it comes from. All of the SpaceX drone ships are named from the Culture series. What was I doing? Right, yes, so we need task boards. Let's pop that in the right folder. So the engineering one is going to be generating tasks via things happening aboard the ship. So I'm very keen for the tasks to not be arbitrary. So I need to make sure that the tasks that are being generated are real tasks that are genuinely relevant to the ship. So those tasks are driven by the actual health values and actual failures. So they're not, I guess they're not like Among Us style tasks, which are just go and do a task for the sake of doing a task. They are go and do a task because a task needs doing. And if you don't do it, something's going to break. So there needs to be some relevancy and purpose behind those tasks. You're not just running around doing things for the sheer sake of doing it. Okay, so this one's going to be task board engineering. And we're going to need a widget. In fact, I think I will use a lot of the code that we were using for these side screens. Not that I can see them anymore because they're all hidden. You'll do. Yes, Anasi. Obviously we can't have that happening constantly, but there will definitely be an element of that. So there will be a sabotage function available to people if they choose to use it, and then the idea is that when you commit an act of sabotage, a timer is then ticking, and if you do another act of sabotage within that timer, there's a greater chance that you will leave evidence behind that it was you that did it. And part of the tactical team's ability will be able to use a tool on the thing that was sabotaged to see whether or not evidence was left behind. So the more often you sabotage things, the more likely it is you'll leave evidence that it was you. And if the evidence is found, then basically the game's up and you've been found out. It's very, very simplistic, but it seems like a nice way of getting that style of gameplay onto the ship without stepping outside of lore or the realms of believability. Just creating all of our optimization stuff. What else do we need? We need that. In fact, we need all of this, don't we? So we've got cable connectivity, the electrical connectivity, reference to the widget, and I should handle the loading screen. So really the first thing we need is that. I guess all of that for now. A lot of the functionality is pretty standardized by now, so we can just bring those groupings in as needed. So we need a variable for that, and that, and that. This just handles the electrical side of things, making sure that we are reporting back like the correct wattage and stuff, so that we know what the resistance is and ultimately amperages are on the wires. Skip that. Actually, no, we won't skip that for a minute. Okay, so let's make the UI itself. And again, I think we'll just borrow one that we created earlier. Hey, Happy New Year. Hope you had a good one. Happy New Year. We don't have snow, sadly. It got really, really cold and then just rained, which I guess is pretty standard for the UK. Okay, so I think I'll replace that with one of our pre-configured ones. So that one. I made a load of widgets already just to make a lot of this more easy. I want these to be quite big, so although that said, 1,000 by 1,000 should be enough. So we don't want that. Don't need the text. Don't need that. More like it. Something like that. Then we'll actually we get rid of that. Don't need that. And then we'll fill that out as needed. It means we don't need that because that manages itself. Try and make these a bit more generic rather than making them class specific. We shouldn't need to know the class because we're just sending blueprint interfaces around. Yeah, because we're just saying we've pressed a button and that's what button we've pressed. Yeah, and then we need to implement that interface on here as well. Oh, it's already there. Ha. That's why I can't find it. Yeah, so we send that blueprint interface to the parent blueprint, and then we receive back using the same interface so that we know what's pressed. That allows us to pass button presses via player controller, thus making them replicated. I think that's all the setup we need. After that, we need to start making a list on here, and we'll start adding child objects to that list as and when new tasks are generated. And I used to do a lot of this on the widgets themselves, but I've kind of moved towards making sure that all the functionality side of things happens on the parent BP instead. So speaking of, so in this instance we do need to cast to the actual class of that widget, which is tasks engineering. So cast to tasks engineering. So that's that. I suppose that is going to require the right type. While it has a fit. Right. That sets that up. So basically we're casting to our widget type, we are saving a reference to that, and then we're setting up the parent blueprint, which is just a reference to self. So now the widget knows who its parent is, so it can send button presses through to its parent, which means we need to then implement that interface. So that we can process the button presses. And on that note, actually, let's once again borrow from this one, because I think we already have that there. Yeah. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel because we've already got a copy of it. Except that's not game state, that's player controller. Oh yeah, so actually there is one thing I need to do. I remember why I was making it class specific now, because I was running a custom event rather than using an interface. The problem with using the interface, i.e. that, is because that's what we're sending from the player controller. So of course you can only use it once. So we're also sending that same event from the widget, then they are conflicting with one another. So we need a from widget version of this. It's one of those things I never got around to doing. So that's the one that comes from the widget, and then that one comes from player controller. So we need same inputs. So we've got a reference to our actor, which we're calling parent EP. Source actor works just the same, really. And then we need our button ID, which is just a string, and then pressed boolean. And I shall make sure that I've named them all the same so we avoid confusion. Although, to be fair, we don't actually need a parent blueprint on this one. I'll keep it for now because there are other blueprints that use it, but once we've sent the message back to the owning blueprint, we don't need to tell it about itself. So once I've updated everything, I'll remove that reference there because it is redundant. Right, so what we're actually sending here is a button press coming from the widget. Obviously, once we've got some buttons, that's where that will come from. So on our blueprint, so rather than having that, we would then do the widget version of that. Which we then pass on again to the player controller. No, other way around actually. So we're sending it to the player controller, and essentially that's the return path. Yeah, and then we're just passing that through. Just wondering actually whether I name that a bit more logically. So I suppose that in actual fact is the client version, and that is the server version. Yeah. So if we're going to be specific about it, I just noticed something terrifying, and that it's actually renamed the event, which means that's probably going to have renamed itself on every single blueprint that uses it. Yeah, so we've got the client button press coming through from the widget, and it comes back as a server button press. So not replicated and comes back replicated, which means on the player controller, we now need to go and fix something. Hey, Delta. Yeah, so because we've renamed that, we now need to, I'm guessing it's just turned it into a standard custom event, which is no good, because we want it to be the actual proper interface event. Of which there are many. So client request comes in. We then turn that into a server button press, and then we send that out to the target, like so. I'm surprised it's not complaining about the fact that the event here is named the same as that, but I guess because we're not... Like, if I was to try and use that interface event, it would complain because they're called the same thing, but I think that bypasses it nicely enough. Or not. Forget everything I just said, because it does in fact complain. Right, client, player controller, server. Let's make sure it's definitely still set to execute on server. Yep. Right, so that's now set up and ready to handle button presses. And then what we'll do is, as tasks are either claimed or assigned, they'll come through the blueprint interface. We might need to make a couple more of these with some struct references in them, but ultimately that's how it's going to work. By constantly having to bug fix it, Don, essentially. Here we are talking about snow. It's actually getting really hot in here. Except I can't find my heating controls. Bear with me. That's better. Starting to overheat. Right, so the last thing we need to do then is just set up this. So we're just setting just a hard coal distance of 20 meters. So regardless of anything else, if it's more than 20 meters away, it will not be drawn. On some blueprints will parameterize that so that we can set it to different values, but for the most part 20 meters is more than far enough. And here we're just basically telling the widget to collapse to a single pixel, which we'll set when we're done with it. Alright, well there's no lights out there actually, so let's just borrow that bit of wall. And then we'll just set our size accordingly. Actually, I think 1000 by 1000 is probably going to be way too small for a wall screen, so let's just fix that in a minute. It's more like it. And of course, being 2000 by 2000, it makes it even more important to collapse this to a single pixel when it's not needed, because that's obviously a fair chunk of VRAM that it will take up otherwise. So just make sure that we're set to 2000, 2000. The right widget set there, and we'll set that on our optimization as well. Make sure it gets put back at the right size. So the fact that it hasn't automatically redrawn is a bit of a bug, in that we have to kind of force an update via a button press. Most of the widgets have got like a fixed widget UI button that I've added to them to do that. Otherwise, they will just use their default values. It seems to be something to do with the fact that because we're using it as like a child widget, then any values you set here don't update unless you force them through a button press. So if we edit that widget, we should have a fix UI display. So by firing this event, it makes it the right size. For some reason, the pre-construct or the construct don't do it. Don't know why. Don't think we've got event construct on here at all, actually. Unless the bug's been fixed. No, it hasn't. So yeah, so if for some reason it just doesn't want to update to its correct size until the game starts, or we fire that event, which we don't need at the moment, but let's just make sure that that works. Obviously we need to make sure that we give it power, otherwise it definitely won't work. So give it a cable name, engineering task board. This is mostly for debugging, so we know which thing is complaining about stuff if need be. Set it to ADEC, otherwise again it will get hidden by the optimization. So we'll just make sure that it's actually there. Which it is not. So it's probably something to do with the electrical side of things. I use the same defaults to this one, so 125 ohms. Set that to -1 so that it's always going to be updated. So we are, okay, so we're wrap notifying that. So we're just making sure that in multiplayer that's updating. I think we're pretty much just doing the same thing actually. Although we're not updating that anywhere. So basically that's redundant. Oh, unless we're setting it from here. Yes, we are. Okay. I see what we're missing. Oops, whoops, whoops, whoops. This is the joys of having so many systems that are all interconnected. They all rely on one another. And blah 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 blah. Right. Let's give that a whirl. Still not there. So we should make sure it's actually getting electric. Hey, pizza delivery. It's kind of a mix, to be honest. So the game is about ultimately living and working aboard a starship. So we want to recreate that sort of classic sci-fi feel of living and working in space, exploring the galaxy, and being part of the crew. So I guess you could say the ship itself is the main character, because you are just part of the crew living to maintain the ship and to make sure that the ship is capable of achieving its objectives. That's basically the main gist of the game. Stylistically, depends on which part of the game you're looking at. So if you're talking about the whole living and working in space thing, that's very Star Trek inspired. The galaxy and the aliens in it are going to be more kind of Babylon 5 inspired in terms of kind of like the type of aliens you find. Yeah, there'll be some hints of Stargate in there as well. Yeah, I guess Star Wars is probably the least of the inspirations of all of it. I mean, we'll have our version of droids, so I guess you could say that was Star Wars inspired. But yeah, it's basically we're taking the things we love most about lots of different sci-fi franchises and kind of just using that as inspiration for our own unique take on those things. If that makes sense. So it's yeah, it's a bit of everything. Yeah, and as Jason says, ultimately, if you're into something which is fast-paced with lots of shooting and blowing things up, this is not that type of game. This is a much more methodical, chess-like thinking game. It's going to be slower paced and yeah, definitely more leaning towards exploration over combat. That's not to say that there won't be combat, because there will, but combat is kind of the consequence of failed diplomacy rather than the point of the game. Hey Sophie, and thank you as always. Here, have a heart. Yeah, it will be survival light. So the crew will have hunger and thirst and physical injury and all those things. But we don't want survival to be like the main point of the game. It's going to be an element of it, but not like the main problem that you're dealing with. Yeah, a lot of the engineering systems are done, to be honest. The engineering systems we have left to do are sublight engines, weapons, and shields. I suppose you could roll artificial gravity into that as well, although that's more of an always-on utility for the most part. When it comes to fluids and electrical simulation, those are the two main things that we had to get done, and we did those first. So like the fusion reactor is using piped fluids and it's generating actual electricity, which is why this isn't working. So like I've just made a UI screen, but it's not turning on because it's looking for electrical signals, which is not getting. So that's part of the sim. So I just need to do a bit of debug on that to make sure that I haven't missed something, which is always the case when you make something from scratch. So it's definitely finding its cable. And then yeah, so when it receives the loading complete message, it should be reporting back. I know it's doing it there. So yeah, so the way the electrical sim works is that you have two types of cables. You have a point-to-point cable, which sends and receives voltages back and forth, and then you have an end cable, which expects to have lots of things plugged into it. So that's like the final spur of the electrical circuit. So in that instance, what we do is we send this wattage report to the cable, and then it adds this actor to its list of things that are connected to it. So the act of sending this kind of makes it aware that this is one of the things it should be sending voltage to. So once it receives this, it will then turn around and send voltage back, because it's an event-driven system. If it were a real-time pulsed system, then we would just be going like blur voltage every second, which we might move to once I've converted it all to C++. It's not performant enough as a blueprint to do that. I guess the other thing we need to do actually is make sure that we're set to replicated, which we are. This one does not need to be always relevant though. Some of them are. Like the reactor, that's always relevant because you don't want the reactor to suddenly not replicate for one tick. Just make sure, so we're definitely set to ADEC, definitely got our cable in, we're not starting at 1 by 1, so are we sending the wrong message here? Because it won't try and set it to not hidden if it's already not hidden. Yeah, that makes sense. Then it kind of fails the logic. Twas not that. Right, let's do some spam. So first of all, we'll check that the deck check is working. So that should that should be spamming true. Okay, so it's definitely not the optimization that's failing it, so it knows that it's on the right deck. Oh, hang on a minute. Task manager, did I just close it? So it's not that one we want to check. Oh, binary, thank you. That's very awesome. Thank you very much. I shall make sure that we both buy something lovely. The goal today is to make departmental task boards, and we're just getting the engineering ones started, so once the screen is visible then we shall be off to the races, hopefully. So current voltage is the one we're interested in, so that should be a non-zero value, so it starts off at 0. Our voltage regulator basically should set it to 100 and cap it at 100, so that should be basically ticking 100, which it is not. Right, so it's basically saying it has no voltage, which is why it's not working. So why does it have no voltage is the question. Oh, hang on a minute, that doesn't look right. That shouldn't be custom event, that should be the penny has dropped. I think I might have actually gone ahead and removed the electrical blueprint interface, like some kind of an imbecile. So basically, I removed the voltage delivery. Shouldn't be needed anywhere else. Have a good one, Binary, and again, happy birthday to your nephew. Hope they have a wonderful birthday. Huzzah, we have a screen. And I'd say that was more than big enough. So yes, the reason it wasn't working was because of me, as always. Right. So armed with this, I guess the next thing we need to do is tie that and that together. And the easiest way to do that is simply to do a hard reference. I guess it depends on where, because these are all living in the server room. I suppose they can all sort of pop into existence as needed, but in order to do a like a hard reference, they need to be on the same level. And I might not necessarily want them on the same level, because it means they'd all have to be on the same level. I mean, I can stick them on just the main level, but that means they'll all be loading immediately, and that's not necessarily what we want. So I think getting all actors of class with tag is probably the most reliable way of doing it, because we're only doing it once. It's not something that's going to... Basically, we do it on begin play and then we don't do it again, so that shouldn't be too detrimental to loading. Okay, so... No, the cables are actually doing a job. So the way it works, so we got some test hardware set up here. So this box here is our, basically think of it as a generator. It's what's standing in for the reactor. Now this has no way of providing voltage directly to a wall screen without an intervening cable. So what happens is the downstream cable in this instance is this one, so feed-hardware, and that's the name of this cable, feed-hardware. So this particular cable is flagged as an end supply, so it assumes lots of things are going to be plugged into it, as opposed to a point-to-point cable, which will have a downstream device name. So we're using the ID and the interface names of cables and devices in order to link those things together. So the voltage source sends voltage to the cable, and the cable passes that voltage on to an end device, in this case the wall screen, and it's an event-driven thing. So when the voltage changes, the event is updated, and then this passes that on to the end devices. So once this is set to say 240 volts, it won't update any of the end devices until that voltage changes. So it's not constantly ticking, it only does an update if something relevant changes. And that way we're saving on performance, because we're not constantly ticking the electrical system. The whole thing is completely event driven. And it needs to be, at least for now, because we've got literally hundreds and hundreds of individual cables all connected to different devices. And if all of them were ticking, and all of that was basically cascading signals all the way down, then obviously that's an update nightmare. So that was, when I first made the system, that's exactly how I did it. And I was using redstone from Minecraft as kind of like the template for how it should work. And if you've ever used redstone in Minecraft, you'll know that after a while, if you have too much, then the lag is crazy. And the same thing was happening here. The longer the rows of cables got, and the more individual cables we were connecting together, the worse and worse the hitching was getting, because obviously we're sending hundreds and hundreds of ticks to all the different cables once per second. So then what will happen is that every second the game was hitching. So when I moved it to an event-driven system, all the hitching went away and everything was nice and performant. Yeah, no worries. Questions are fine. It depends, Jason. I think as we flesh out the system and increase the voltages, then yes, we're going to have to move to much higher voltages, because Obviously, you're going to have amperages which are through the roof otherwise. So in order to keep the amperages down, we need to push the voltages up. And some of the cables are going to be very, very high voltage. Like the FTL feeds are probably going to be 500 amp cables or 500 amp fuses. Or was it 5,000 amp? I can't remember now. Big chunky fuses. And obviously the associated cables are going to be big and chunky as well. So it's whatever voltages we need to go to in order to keep the amperages like stable. But obviously you then have arcing to worry about, because the higher the voltage, the greater the arc distance, and therefore the wider the cable needs to be in order to manage arcing. So there's going to be a balancing act of voltage versus amperage, and how much amperage can we cope with in order to keep the arcing down, and all that fun is to come, because we haven't actually properly modelled the really high voltage stuff yet. It's all just been the domestic circuits. But that is taken into account. Yeah, I think we'll probably draw the line at that. So, as with all things, there's only so much we can simulate before it gets like beyond the point of, or outside the scope of the game. So, I want the electrical simulation to get to the point where we're modeling heating on cables because of amperage and resistance. So, if the cable is damaged and then resistance is going up, then amperage is going to go up because you're pushing more voltage across to try and get the same voltage at the end device, and that's where you have cables burning out and heating up. And so we want to model that aspect of it, but kind of nothing beyond that. That's kind of like as far as we want to go with it. Exactly, yeah. We want to simulate the fundamentals of the electrical system without starting to look at EM interference and that sort of stuff, because that's really beyond the scope of the game. What we're interested in is if you turn the voltage up too high, the cable now catches fire. That's basically it. That's where we're interested. Right, what were we doing? Engineering tasks, that was it. So we're going to manage active tasks. That's where we're going to be basically checking to see whether the tasks are complete. And then we also need to assign tasks, or at least see this one needs to work differently, doesn't it? Because we're populating a list instead. So I suppose this can incorporate that as well. So we need to start updating that tasks board. So if we create a variable for that, just be an actor. I think we'll make a new blueprint interface for sending tasks around if we don't have one already. Not yet. So is a simulation of the cable based on diameter? Not yet, no. But it won't be quite as straightforward as that, because we'll also have different material properties as well. So part of the upgrade path for the ship is that we'll start off with standard copper cabling, but then we'll want to replace that copper cabling with some new mineral we've discovered, which allows you to pass higher voltages with less amperage and that sort of thing. So they're basically a better material to use for cabling that's closer to a room temperature superconductor. And then we'll have like a grading system for different materials that get closer and closer to superconductors, away from basic old copper. Yeah, copper oxidization is probably another one, which is beyond the scope of the game. Does it melt? That's all we care about. Right, so I guess on begin play, we want to set that, so we need a sequence, and then we need a get all actors of class with tag. So if 0 is a valid index, then we shall get that reference and assign it. If it's not, then we shall delay for half a second. Actually, no. 10 milliseconds should be enough for everything to load. And we shall go ahead and just keep looping that until until we've successfully established what our task board is. Actually, we want to gate that behind our global event. So we want our event handler, and we want to find global event by name, and that is levels loaded. So we don't want to start searching for the other actor until we're sure that all the levels have been loaded. And this is one of those things which I need to convert to the gameplay messaging subsystem, which I will do at some point, but for now we'll just continue using our plugin. Right, so once all the levels are loaded, we will then start looking for our task board, and then we'll we'll start our tick after that as well. In fact, we'll start our tick after that, because there's no point at ticking if we don't have a valid task board. Okay. So that should at least establish communication with the board. So I guess the very first thing we want to do, in fact, if we not use that for a minute. Right, so do we have an interface for that already? Okay, we've got our ship-wide orders one, which I'm assuming we've kind of dual-purposed. Yeah, we have actually. So we need to do like an engineering task version of that. Okay, actually let's double click that as a shortcut. So we want to create engineering task. I suppose these ones have got their own types. Yep. Didn't make one already, so in the same way that we've done those, we need to make an engineering task struct. and they're going to need to be specifics. Yeah, so let's copy that there. Make that an engineering task. Yes, Anasi, I will be doing a yearly update video, or imminently really, just as soon as I find a spare 5 minutes to do it. So it's going to be sometime either this week or next. Well, it's Friday already, so hopefully by the end of next week. Just need to find myself a spare 5 to 10 minutes to put something together. I say 5 to 10 minutes, more like 3 hours, but still. Yeah, so the ship's framework will be something like Ti3AU. I think I like that as a material because of its strength, but we don't know how well it handles like bending. I haven't read enough about it to know like the full like technical details of it. I know that they use it for medical implants because it's so hard and so hard wearing, but then, you know, is it ductile? Like if you make a starship out of it, is it going to shatter? So, you know, there's stuff we need to do a bit more research on. Yeah, I imagine Claire would probably enjoy doing a bit of coding. I do keep trying to get her into it. Right, so we're going to create engineering task. In fact, let's create a few of them. Let's do 10. Okay, so that needs to be struct engineering. And we shall make our task data. Right, so basically we are firing 10 engineering tasks at our task board once we've identified that task board in the world. Obviously these are wrong. Although looking at this, I think we definitely will separate out the bridge ones from the rest of the ship. The more I think on it, the more that makes sense to me. Right, so we need a couple of enums then. Again, we'll steal the other ones just for the sake of speed. So, engineering roles. So we've got chief engineer, and then we've got engineer. That's pretty much it in the engineering department. I don't think there's anything in and around engineering that requires a specialist as such. I think it's all engineering-y enough that all of the engineers can do all of the engineering jobs. And obviously then we have the chief engineer overseeing it all. And then we'll have 2 bridge duty stations as well for engineering. And then the tasks for engineering. See, these are going to be interesting ones because there's going to be a lot of them. So we've got our generic ones, which is perform maintenance, perform repair, replace something. But then there's going to be a lot of specific tasks for setting the state of something. So if we were to call a ship-wide status for like cold and dark, for example, and that would be something which is like an overall engineering ship-wide condition, or a ship condition, I suppose, for engineering, which is another system that we need to do. Then lots and lots of tasks need to be generated for all the different boxes that all need switches switching. So in order to set the ship cold and dark, you're probably going to have several dozen tasks that need to be performed, and all of those need to be an individual assigned task that come up on the task board. In fact, now I think on it, that's probably the first good test of this system, where we get the engineers to set the ship cold and dark and then set it ship ready, flight ready. So we have those as rather than ship-wide conditions that are generalized, we have a ship condition which is specific to engineering. Yeah. We can probably do that quite easily, actually. I've got out to drink. Yeah, because we've got the devices around engineering. We know where they are. So if we have a unique ID for each device, then we can generate the task with that device specifically as the target for that task. And then when the NPC gets to that device, they then perform the action that needs to be performed. And that needs a specific interface ID as well, so they know which button they're pressing. Yeah, so there's going to be layers of complexity there, because finding the right box is easy, pressing the right button, that's another layer of detail on top. And it does mean that each button needs its own ID, which is needed anyway, because for the tutorial system, we want to move to the point where we're tracking button presses rather than like hitting a yellow highlighter, and often missing. Yeah. True, CSR, yeah, and also there are things which need doing ahead of other things. So it might even have to be a staged thing where, although we might set the ship as, well, I suppose cold and dark's easy, you just turn everything off, but when you're doing the startup sequence, obviously you need to do certain tasks before other tasks, so you need tasks generated in the right order. So yeah, or we simply wait. So if one of the tasks is set the reactor to supply, now obviously that task is not possible until the reactor is running. So there has to be a state thing there waiting. But what we don't want to do is we don't want the NPC picking the task up and then not doing any of the other jobs because they're just sat there waiting for this one state to be ready, which means you've removed that NPC from the pool of of useful people because they're just hanging around waiting for their chance to press that one button. So we kind of need a, like, is it possible yet flag on the task, so that if the task is not yet possible, then it can't be assigned, which is another layer of complexity to add to this system. There's definitely going to be a lot of state checking with this in order for it to run smoothly. Yes, we definitely do want to use actual Navy checklists as inspiration, for sure. Oh, cool! I've seen some of Devin's videos before, and they're very, very good. That's exactly the kind of detail we're looking for. Yeah, well, we need to get to the point, much as if you're doing it with another player, in that you've got different people in different rooms, all flicking switches as and when they light up. So you'll have someone go to, say, like a distributor, it's not on, they'll be waiting there for a couple of minutes for it to suddenly light up, and then they can press their buttons. But you need those people sort of placed strategically to maximize startup speed. But yeah, we'll look into that then. Yeah, it's difficult because I mean, you're kind of talking about like reinforcement learning at that point. You know, when you're getting them to learn from their mistakes, and again, that's a whole nother layer of complexity. Let's start simple. Right, so we've got perform routine maintenance. Perform, not performing. Then we've got conduct repair, 3D print component, which might be required for the repair. Remove components. I suppose there's a whole string of things there. So you've got diagnose and repair. It might not be possible to repair, so in which case you have to remove 3D print, and then I suppose replace components. Yeah, so there's going to be a string of tasks which get assigned, probably more relevantly to an NPC, because they'll be doing it step by step. But I think for the player, it's just going to be a case of this thing's broken, fix it, and then you'll see through looking at it whether or not it can be fixed with a spot repair, or whether or not it needs to be removed, replaced, and a new component 3D printed. So maintenance, diagnostics, repair. Right. If we leave it at that for now, just for testing purposes, when it comes to actually changing the state of a thing, like turning the reactor up and down or doing the cold dark startup, then we definitely need button awareness at that point, which is kind of a precursor thing we'd have to do first before we can do this. Yeah, probably, Kaji. I don't see why not. Yeah, so the preventative maintenance, that is something that's going to happen automatically, because this perform maintenance thing, a task will be raised when the health value of an object reaches a certain threshold. And that's something that we need to do for the automated task raising system. So if that object becomes damaged beyond requiring maintenance, then the system needs to be capable enough to strip out the maintenance task and cancel it, and then replace that task with a repair task instead. So yeah, there's going to be some work to do with regards to that. But yes, generally speaking, most of the tasks that get raised will be because an object's health has dropped below a certain value or a certain percentage, and that triggers the routine maintenance of that object. And just natural wear and tear will be happening continuously as the ship is used. So the health values of everything across the board will be dropping at different rates. Some things more than others. When you start a new game, we will assign random quality values to all of the components. And the idea is, the lower the quality, the quicker the health will drop through damage or just wear and tear. When you repair something, then the quality will drop further when you conduct a repair. Thus, it will break more quickly in the future. So there's only so many times you'll be able to do a spot repair before the quality is reduced so low that it's just breaking continuously. So you'll get to the point where you've got this one cable which is constantly failing because its quality value is just reduced that much. So at that point, you're better off just 3D printing a replacement, replacing it entirely, and then its quality is reset to maximum, and then it takes a while for that object to break again. So you've got this kind of organic relationship between all the items on the ship. And by randomizing that at the start of the game, it means that there are going to be some pieces of hardware which are not quite as high quality as others, so they'll become pain points that you'll probably end up fixing first. Yes, Cloud. That's basically one of the things we want for the chief engineer role, is the ability to move people around tasks and assign specific people to do specific things, and also to prioritize tasks on the list as well. So by default, we'll have, like, the higher the voltage the system, the more critical it will be considered, because that's just a nice way of managing criticality. Because generally speaking, the high voltage systems are more critical than the low voltage systems, and you care more about the engines failing than you do the lighting in a corridor failing or a door not opening. But if the door that's broken happens to be the door to the bridge, then obviously you want to step in and say, actually, that's quite important, let's get that fixed first. So yes, so you'll be able to change the priority on tasks. And when it comes to the NPC crew, we'll have them just picking from the top of the list down, so they'll always be picking the highest priority tasks. So you can manage assignment simply by just changing the priority, or by picking a particular NPC, telling them to stop what they're doing, and then assigning another task for them. Yeah, and of course we can. the priority system can also define at what health value that thing gets a preventative maintenance task raised for it. And again, I don't see why we can't have that be a player configurable value. So if you're particularly concerned about a particular set of subsystems, then you can set their priority values higher, thus they will be maintained more frequently. But I guess the downside to doing that is you are constantly reducing the quality of those items, which means in the future they will break more frequently. So there's definitely a balancing act to manage there. But that's going to be interesting because obviously we need to play test that and find the sweet spot. But yeah, so if the coffee machine in your quarters is your priority, you could set that to like mission critical, and that will be the only thing the engineers care about, which would be quite funny. Yeah, well, I like the idea that we'll prioritize things by default in a way that makes the most sense, but whilst also leaving room for players to come in and set their own priorities. So the defaults will be like standard settings, and then if you want to switch that up, you'll be free to. Yeah, and obviously, yeah. And then setting coffee machines to mission critical, of course. So that's roles, engineering, tasks, engineering, and then we need so I suppose we need like target object, and that's going to be an actor. Yeah, so I think moving forward with this, we'll need to add, I suppose we can add it here. So we're kind of generically calling every plug, port, hole an interface. So like a breaker, we're treating it as an interface on the box. I guess that's just coming from my networking days, but if it's a hole that you can plug something into, it's an interface. So there'll be an interface ID for everything, I suppose. So we need to know what interface on which device. So if the task is turn something on, I suppose actually on the tasks, so we'd have turn set interface on, set interface off, set interface toggle, or just toggle interface. Because we can then tie that with our interface ID. That's actually ID on the end there. So if you're just repairing a cable, then it's just going to be a case of fix this, and that will just be a cable. I suppose ultimately we need to be able to report back on the name of things, so we can maybe just use the actor reference to get the name of whatever it is. Yeah, so we're not going to be able to pull that from nowhere on here. So just do engineering task, perform maintenance. Obviously we'd need to know what device we're talking about, and then interface would be irrelevant in this particular one because you're just using a tool on a device. We'll have different tools with engineering with different tasks. So we'll have just like an engineering scanning tool. So when you use that on a device or a cable or something, it will tell you things like quality, health, and all that sort of stuff. Things that are pertinent to knowing, you know, what you need to do. Like it might say that it's, you know, faulty beyond repair, for example, in which case you know that, okay, it's, you know, you're not fixing this, you need to go and print a new one. And then we'll have probably a tool for removing things, probably the same tool for reconnecting things. We need like an electric screwdriver type device for removing wall panels. Yeah, we'll come up with a set of tools for that. Yeah, I think multimeter functionality will roll into the engineering tool, just generally the maintenance tool. Yeah, so see, I was thinking about the usage of tablets in the game, but if we've got the wrist thing, then tablets are kind of irrelevant, really. So it'll be a case of you'll have an assigned repair task. So if you use your wrist device, you'll see the details of the repair task on your wrist device. And that will tell you things like how far away it is. And you'll also have a button on there to create a breadcrumb trail. So like we've got on the tutorial where it draws the path to the target, we'll have a button for that for people that don't want to go and actually find where the thing is. Because by default it will give you like the panel number of where the thing is. So if you can't be bothered to look for the panel number, we will just have an easy mode button that will just show you a breadcrumb trail. Yes, so if the NPC fails to get to its task 3 times in a row, then we'll have it abandon the task and return it back to the queue. Because sometimes they can fail for a stupid reason. So we'll want them to try a couple of times. If they're consistently failing, then yeah, they need to abandon the attempt so someone else can have a go. Yeah, because a lot of the faults, I mean, most of the faults are going to be cable faults. So it's going to be, you know, cable X behind panel Y. So and unless you know specifically where that cable and that panel are located, you're going to be like going segment by segment, reading all the panel numbers until you find the right one. So having the HUD show you where it is probably going to be the easiest way of doing it. The NPCs will just know by magic. Right, so where did we get to? So we've got our engineering doodah, it's finding the screen, it's firing off 10 tasks, which are all the same task. So what we need here is we need to receive that task. So we need We need that interface for ship-wide orders. So create engineering task. Okay, so I suppose the easiest way to do this is, again, rather than ticking it, we'll do an event-driven thing. So every time a new task is received, we will refresh the task list rather than having it just auto-refreshing on tick, just to save a little bit of CPU time. So we want to, I guess if we make that an array, so these would be I guess live tasks. So we create a task, we add it to the live task list, like so. So now we've got 10 live tasks, and then we would need to I guess replicate that as well. Yeah, we'll rep notify it. Because every time that's updated, obviously we want that to be passed on to clients as well, which means this needs to be replicated. We'll make this one always relevant because we don't want tasks to go missing. So then we'll need to get our widget, and then we'll need to update task list on there. Actually, let's get that version because we've got the type of widget already. And then we need to create a task on here. So we don't want that one, we want that one. So custom event on here, which is refresh task list. And then we have a list of tasks. Which is an array. And then we'll refresh accordingly from that. So this will be constantly updating, well, or rather, it will be updated when this updates. So whenever a new client joins, that will refresh and update. Yep, and yep. So that would be refresh task list. Pop in our live tasks. So that's our replicated task list refresh. So the only thing that we're now missing from this process is actually rendering those tasks to the screen. Now the system that I use for this is really confusing. So let me see if I can remember how to do it. So it's, can't remember whether it was list view or it might have been list view. Must have been list view, yeah. Because what we need to do is you make the entry widget, but it also needs like a data widget to go with it. Let me refresh my memory. And the reason we do it this way is because this list view, it only renders the child widgets when they're visible within the list view itself. So like when we're doing like the galaxy stuff, we could have like upwards of 10,000 stars within range, and without using a list view we'd have 10,000 widgets on there visible at once, and as you can imagine that would just crash the game. So using a list view, it means we can have technically an infinite number of list view objects, children, and only ever render that many of them at once. The downside to that is they're instanced, so each one's an instance of this child widget, which means they're also shared, so you can have them sort of lingering onto old data that doesn't refresh fully, so you kind of have to be a little bit careful with them, or so I have found. Yeah, so if we copy that, but they also definitely have a data component as well, because you construct, oh yeah, that needs to go away, be gone. You construct the object there, and then you cast to it. But this is the really weird thing, in that in order to get the values for the variables, you have to cast to itself to get the values. It's a really weird backwards way of doing it, but it works. Yeah. It confuses me every time I do it, because it's one of those things which is really not intuitive at all. Right, so we're going to grab a copy of that just because. So pop that in there. Ah. Hello, random crash. That is an unhelpful error message. You'll be able to dismantle it down to, or basically the metal. So you won't be able to dismantle the frame itself, but you'll be able to remove all the wall panels, all the floor panels, all the cables, all the hardware, because essentially you'll be able to remove things in order to repair them and replace them. So you can literally strip the ship bare. Probably not the furniture though, that's where it's going to, well, I suppose you could just destroy the furniture. But, so what do we need to rebuild? None of them should be alright. At 5.7, when I've replicated the functionality of one of our plugins, so we have a plugin, in fact it's on here, that one. So the global event handler is the plugin we use for generating those global tasks. So when we bind event to a global task, that's basically that plugin. But the plugin has not been updated for 5.7, and the functionality of that plugin actually exists within the engine already. So really, it's become a redundant plugin at this point, but so much of the game relies on it because we're doing things like bind on global event, like everywhere. So every time we do this, which is literally everywhere, we need to replace this with the gameplay messaging subsystem that's built into the engine, which is, I believe, a new thing with one of the more recent 5 point whatever versions. But it means going through practically every single blueprint and replacing the functionality. And as you can probably imagine, that's a lot of work. Basically, yeah. So I'm going to try and do the whack-a-mole part before the delete part, but I'm sure I will miss some references to that plugin. But deleting a plugin always excites me. I like not using plugins, so yeah, I'm looking forward to getting rid of it. But it has served us well, and I certainly couldn't criticize it because it's allowed us to move to a global event process, to make a truly modular set of systems rather than having to rely on casts and other, having to create blueprint interfaces for everything. Having global events, it's been such a useful thing to have. So yeah, highly recommended. But yes, there is a built-in way of doing it now. About 1700, Caesar. It would probably take me longer to make the script than it would to replace everything. So yeah, it's just one of those afternoons that I just need to just spend an afternoon just going through every blueprint and replacing all the references. Well, not only that, but also setting up all the messaging channels as well. If I can even remember where it is. Ah, yeah, here. So you can see here I've set up Helm inputs. It doesn't show the struct. I think that was one of the ones I used as well. Yeah. So I've started building the gameplay tags, and all of these also serve as a messaging channel. So you can broadcast messages to these channels, and then you can have blueprints listening on these channels for sending and receiving data. And you can send structs on these channels. So you can actually send a payload with the message. So from a modularity perspective, when you're building game systems, you can have like system A send out a broadcast knowing nothing about the target, no casting involved, no blueprint interfaces involved, and then you could have multiple other blueprints that are listening on that channel. So they'll receive that payload and that struct and then act on it accordingly. And then those two systems know nothing about one another. They don't need to know about one another. It's a completely isolated, separate set of systems that are communicating through global events. It's a very nice modular way of building things, and it completely eliminates reference chains. But like with using those list views, it's not particularly intuitive, and it does require a bit of head scratching to get it to work. I find most of the truly valuable stuff is kind of non-intuitive and really requires some mental processing to get your head around it, but it's kind of worth it in the long run. Right, so where were we? Departmental task system, engineering. None of that got lost, so that's good. So we need a task board. So we're adding our task. And we're refreshing the task list on the UI, so that's still there. Right. So we were copying over the task, or rather the list view object, weren't we? So sensors. It was that one we were using. Let's try again. Copy that there. Great. Going to actually tag these with list view so I don't kind of lose them in the future. Right, so this is where we would build our list of stuff. So like how we've done this, obviously we'll make each task come up in a visually pleasing way. And then we'll have things like priority, pending, all that stuff. Color code them by priority. I think that would be probably nice to see. So, you know, ignore the green ones, cherry pick the red ones. And then we'll show like assignee, I think, as well. We'll show which player and or NPC is assigned to something. And then maybe we'll show some extra buttons that only the department head can access. So like withdraw task, reassign task, that sort of thing. And then we need to make sure that if the department head reassigns a task, then it has to like flag up on the UI for players that this task has been reassigned, you're no longer doing this, your current task is now this. So we need to make sure all that's communicated to the player. Right, so this is now going to be completely invalidated. This should stay relevant. So cast to task view, sorry, list view, engineering task. And then basically we can get rid of all of that, and I suppose all of this, because that's stuff we don't need. Double check. Nah, don't need any of that. So that's when you click it. And again, that's not relevant. So we need to know whether or not these things are selected. And again, when they become selected, we need to make sure that we update like the background color and stuff to show that they've been selected. And then when we scroll off screen, so this is what gets called when it's not on screen anymore, we need to make sure that we then reset a bunch of stuff. So that's relevant to the sensors only. So we'll need to manage that as we go. That's not relevant, that's not relevant. So we need to, first of all, get rid of all the unused variables. and make some more. So I suppose the first one would be task name. Store that as a text, and then we will simply replace that with the task name. So get task name, and again, so even though, and this is the non-intuitive part of this, even though we have that variable stored, it isn't assigned a value. You have to cast to the class that this is to get the value, because the data is held as part of the list item object, which gets set when it scrolls into view, and you then have to kind of find that data through casting. You can't just drag that out and expect the value to be there, which is what I expect, but you can't. You have to cast to it first. Right, so that should be sufficient to at least rename the box. Let's change this, so like priority or whatever. Whatever. Actually, if we do priority like that, and then assigned to that, or I suppose unassigned would be the default, wouldn't it? Something like that. Leave that blank. Don't need them. They would be buttons. But yeah, we'll design this and make it look nice. So on here then, we need to bring in our list view, and then obviously make that bigger. Stick it in the middle, and then we shall add our class there, so that's engineering task. So this is probably a bit overkill in terms of screen size, but again, we'll refine that as we go. So again, because it's not updating this until you begin play, it's going to look a bit weird. Okay, so when we refresh our task list, we need to get our list view and then clear the list view, clear list items. So basically we are clearing it completely, and then we grab our task list, and then for each we need to, I can remember how to do this, so I think you need to construct object from class, which would be the engineering list view. So we're constructing the object. We are then setting the variable, so we're set task name, and for that we will grab our struct and just grab that and convert it to a string. Enum to string, string to text. Pop that in there. And then I think you, is it add item? And then just pop that there. So I think that's how you do it. If all went to plan, there should be 10 duplicate tasks on that UI. No, nothing. Okay, so let's go and have a look at the sensors a minute to make sure that I'm doing it right. Right, so that'll do. So blah 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 blah. Oh, wrong one. This is the widget we care about. Okay, so what are we doing then? So we're going through there, grabbing the details. Right, so we're constructing... Yeah, so we're constructing... Ah, we're doing it from there. Okay, so... Right, so we're setting the values on there. Then we're adding item... Well, that's it. So clear list items, construct the widget, and then add it. Clear list items, construct the widget. Yeah. So we're not doing that from there. Which means we need to expose that on spawn. So if we refresh that, that should come up. Oh. Right, so we're setting it there. Okay, so that should be it. I guess the only reason that wouldn't work is if that is reading 0, or if that's not being called. So let's make sure that that is working. Ah, you know what I haven't done is I haven't actually set any of this up. So so we want engineering task doodah. So task board engineering. So the tag would be task board engineering. It would help if it knew what it was. And just add that as a tag. Although to be perfectly honest, that's better off just going on there by default. It's always going to be that. Okay. least now it will find its task board. Okay, so the question is, where is it failing? So I'm pretty sure... Oh, unless that didn't have a space in it. Hang on, let's make sure we're calling the right events, because that would slow us down. Ah, it's loading complete, not levels loaded. Null reference is delicious. Oh, I thought I had it then. Okay. Time for some spam. So levels loaded. We'll see where it actually chooses to fail. So levels loaded. Task board found. So when we create engineering task, we're going to rapidly iterate through this. So we're going to add, we're going to add to the array, and every time we do, it's going to refresh that task list. So it's going to refresh this 10 times in quick succession, which perhaps is not what we want to do, but we'll give it a try. Let's just lower that to 5 tasks, just so that we can spam creating task. Okay, and then on this side, task received. So that's the manager, isn't it? I know that's the board. So task board, task received. That's task manager. Creating task. Task manager board found. Don't touch that. Task manager levels loaded. So task board, refreshing task list. And then finally, task widget, refreshing task list, and then I suppose while we're at it, task list item, list item added. Right, there we can see where it fails. Right, so we're loading our levels, we're finding our task board, we're creating a task. The task board is receiving 5 tasks, and that's where it stops. Okay. I'm wondering whether or not it's because adding to this is not triggering the on-rep notify. Just a hunch. Huzzah! Okay, so we have 5 lonely tasks, and they all say perform maintenance. Okay. Progress. Interesting that it took so long to do the list items. Let's do that again a sec. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so it's not actually adding the list items until the UI is ready, which is nice because we want that. So what we've got happening here is this box is generating the tasks, which is then firing across to this box, which is then listing the tasks that have been generated. So the next thing to do would be to actually generate a task for an NPC to have that NPC go off and then complete that task. So we need to know that that's actually happening. So let's just go back and get rid of some of our spammage. As much as I love debug spam, sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. So, okay, so actually the next thing we need to do is have a point of interest in the world, i.e. a cable, be broken and raise a task. So we need, I suppose the ship's computer is kind of like the manager for all of this. So the ship's computer needs to identify that a cable has broken, and then needs to raise an alert that that cable is broken, and it raises that obviously into the engineering task manager, which then generates the task. NPC then picks up that task, fixes the cable, and then everything obviously lights up and goes back to normal. That's kind of the sequence of events. So we want to kill that. Yeah, so I guess the next thing we need to do is start that bit of it. So if we use our lighting cable, so we've got a couple of different things from the old system we had, where if the cable was suffering from a short, it would do things like it would fire off sparkles. So what we need is we need a health value trip. Well, that's just the visual side of stuff, don't care about that. Don't think I added health into this yet. That's going to be, yeah, it's one of the factors. So actually an interesting thing about the electrical system is that we can spike the signal with certain flags. Like, so if the current is coming from an emergency backup, we flag that with emergency backup at the cable level. So any light connected to that cable knows that the voltage it's receiving tastes like emergency voltage and not normal voltage, and thus will change its color accordingly. But we also need health value. Did have that at one point, because we've got our damage stuff. Oh, there, yeah. Knew we had it somewhere. Good night, CSI. Have a good one. Right, I'm going to create a very simple Boolean, I think, for just like broken. So if we start that as false, so when we do our voltage delivery, which is that one, send voltage downstream. So blah 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 blah. So basically this. So we use a select for this. So if broken is false, then we will send the voltage that we were always going to send. If broken is true, we'll send voltage 0. Obviously, we'll make it a lot more granular than that, but for testing purposes, it means that we can flag this cable, for example, as broken. So now we should have no lighting in the bridge. So all the lights are off because the cable is broken. So if we keep it broken, so what we need to do, and again, so this is an event-driven system. It doesn't tick anything because we don't want anything doing anything. Yeah, so I've replaced that. basically, we want it to raise an event on a given actor in the world, but only one event per actor. So if this actor is like, hey, I'm still broken, we don't want it to go, oh, look, something's broken, and raise another event, because then we'll be raising events continuously. But we don't want to miss it either. So obviously we're setting broken here. So that's getting a voltage delivery from our voltage source. Actually, we'll replicate this. So what's the best place to put this? I guess here, to be honest. Because if it's received voltage from elsewhere, i.e. there has been a state change, then... No, that's debug. So if broken is true, do a thing. Otherwise carry on. So we need to... So at this point, we need to raise a task because this cable is broken. So if we... Okay, so there are two options here. Either we have the engineering hardware, cables, pipes and everything included, raise tasks directly with their relevant task manager, which would be the engineering task manager in this instance, or we have them raise their task with a global task manager, i.e. the ship's computer, and then it filters those tasks to where they need to go. Like efficiency wise, they may as well just raise it with the relevant task manager. I'm just thinking in terms of tracking ship-wide tasks globally and whether or not a single global task manager would have better visibility of that, or am I just adding an additional system pointlessly when I can just query the systems we have? Because the systems we have still need to exist. So let's try doing it direct, which means on begin play, blah 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 blah, loading complaint, yada yada yada. So we'll do the same as what we did on here, where we will grab our task manager. This is just going to be quick and dirty, just to test a concept. So we want engineering tasks manager. That's task manager engineering, and make sure that it has the relevant tag. Obviously, there's a lot of cables that are going to be registering this. So is valid index. If so, get a copy of that index and promote. So engineering manager. Right, so this should ensure that we get a copy of the task manager reference or die trying. And so then we can grab that, and I suppose we'd just raise I guess report task, because we don't really have that on here, do we? So we got create engineering task there. So I suppose we need, so we need a master list of tasks on here, and then the jobs board is really just displaying the output from this device. So the jobs board doesn't need to manage anything, it's only reporting. So the management needs to happen here, which means we do need an array of live tasks. So struct engineering department tasks. Right, so we need an array of them. And as part of that struct, of course, we have an actor reference, so we can just use that. So I suppose I'll just make sure we've got the task interface. So task, what did I call it? Ship wide orders, that was it. Need to rename that to something more sensible. So if we use add unique, then we shouldn't have any repeat tasks that involve the same thing on that same actor. We could have a different thing on the same actor, but not the same task specifically. But it shouldn't be an issue because we're only ever generating that one repair. Right, so create engineering task, and then make. So we won't worry about task ID for now. Oh, saying that actually. I wasn't going to bother, but actually saying that we will bother, because we'll need to start tracking completion, and we'll add this to the task list as well, so we can see the actual task ID. So role engineer, and I guess we'll just do repair components, because it's broked, and the device would be a reference to self, because that's the actor we're talking about. Don't care about the interface ID. So just as a test, what we should see this device raise a task for itself as broken. We'll use the actor name as our name. Okay, and then when we do that, I suppose we also need to I guess we're not creating a task on there, are we? We're refreshing the task list. So So we're going to need our blueprint interface for that as well. So we want update engineering tasks, and that's just going to be a task list, which is an array of struct engineering tasks. Okay, so update task list. Okay, so all we're doing is when we receive a new task, we're just going to pass that through to the task board. And then we'll have some ticking function going on that's actually managing this. And we'll keep updating the task board as and when this changes. On that note, actually, rather than doing that, why don't we? Yeah, we'll rep notify this because this needs to be replicated. Yeah, so whenever this array gets changed in some way, then we'll update the task board accordingly. Nice and tidy. So on our task board, we need the same thing on here. So we've got update engineering tasks. Which basically just replaces that, because because we're never going to raise an individual task directly on here. We're only ever just updating the UI. In fact, to the point where, because we're rep notifying from here, we don't actually need to do it from here. So what we can do is we can do that, stop replicating that, because it doesn't need to replicate. Right, and then that will just refresh the task list accordingly. In fact, we could probably skip that even and just do that, but that might actually even be enough. So let's see. Actually, let's, before we, so it's just going to raise the one task, and then on here we want to add a couple of additional variables. So we want, so the task name, target object, and task ID. So that's going to be an integer, that can just be text. So target object we will actually put there for now. And then get ID. And then we will set that as that. Actually, no. There was another one, wasn't there? That one. So we'll need to. I think we probably need to. Oh, no, we can do to text. Good. Right. So we should see our target object and task ID, which means we need to also set that here. So we refresh that. Oh wait, I didn't set them to expose on spawn. Fine, we'll also make them instance editable, not that you need to. There we go. Okay. So that and that, so we'll do to string, and then obviously to text. And then again, that could just go into there. Right, let's see. Do we have an automated task being raised? Ooh, we do. So we've got a repair task being raised for that cable because it is broken. Huzzah. Okay. Yeah, that's not a bad shout, actually, Illusion. Yeah. See, as we build this, obviously we're going to refine and iterate as we go, because I'm a big fan of just iterating as we go. Ultimately, this also needs to report back to the engineering bridge console. So when you select engineering on the bridge, you see like a 3D model of all the pipes and cables and things, and the one that's faulty should be flashing red. So you should actually see the cable flashing on the holo display. And obviously it needs to get that data from somewhere, so that needs managing too. But we now have that cable reporting a fault to that box, which is displaying on that UI. So the next step, assuming we have nav mesh, which we do, would be to get an NPC to actually pick up that task, fix that cable, and then have the lights turn on, which is a return of the repair dance. And if anyone was around 3 years ago, we used to have the NPCs repairing all the lights on the ship, and they'd always just dance on the spot as their repair animation. So let's see whether I've still got that animation. Yes, definitely. So we have a lot of UI space available to us. So I think depending on the number of tasks we're raising, because there might be quite a few, yeah, we'll have a lot more information per task. Where is our NPC? Can never remember where I put anything. There we go. Engineer. Don't know why he's naked. Just see whether or not he puts his uniform on a minute. No. That's probably linked to the other issue we're having with customization right now. Unless I just haven't set him up properly. So it should be giving him the engineering uniform. What did I break? Probably all of that. Oh, that's a bunch of meta-human stuff. That's no longer relevant. Right, yeah, there's a reason that's not connected, because that's all for meta-humans. I'm wondering actually whether this is like the old NPC. No, it can't be actually, because it's the new character. Hold up a minute, let me check the ones that were actually spawning, because I'm worried that they're all naked now. That would be less than optimal. Yeah, the customization's a bit wonky at the moment, because I've had to change how we spawn the character because of VR. So we're now spawning a loading pawn, and then we're basically destroying the loading pawn, and then we're possessing your actual player pawn. But whether or not you're playing in VR or first person, we're spawning and possessing different pawns. And obviously the character customization needs to work with both. So the way we're applying that customization is now changed, because rather than using the player start locations, we're physically spawning the character and then possessing it. So things are happening in a different order. So there's a few bits and pieces that need sorting out with that. Right, B deck NPCs. Okay, they're not naked. That's good. Right, so they are a different actor. That makes sense. So where do you live? Okay, so yeah, so these must have been the old ones then. And this is the new one. I need to delete like the old stuff that I make, because it ends up hanging around and confusing me. Right, so you can go away because you're old. There we go. Clothed. Jesus. She's got problems. So if we, so we'll set them just a free roam, just make sure that they're actually doing their job. Department engineering, don't worry about the rank or anything. Assigned role engineering. Right, let's just make sure that they do indeed free roam. Yeah. Right, good. He's immediately complaining about me to the command staff. Okay, so on our next Friday stream then, what we will do is we will get Arian here actually picking up tasks from the jobs board and then physically repairing the cable. The goal here is he should autonomously pick up the task and repair the lights. That's kind of mission accomplished in terms of having the ship generate relevant tasks and then having the NPCs go and fix whatever's broken. But I think that is done for now. So it's not a bad bit of progress there. So just to summarize, we have an engineering task manager, that box there. We have a broken cable, which is reporting itself as broken to the task manager. The task manager is then generating a task, which is appearing on the tasks board, ready to be assigned to an NPC, who will be getting the joy of fixing that next Friday. It doesn't seem a lot for 4 hours, but we got there. You're very, very welcome, Festus. It is a pleasure, as always. And then on Sunday, we'll be back for more Caravella fun. And then Wednesday, we'll be doing more Magellan. And as I say, Friday, we'll get back to this and get the NPCs actually doing stuff aboard the ship in a very real way, which is very cool. Right, so have a good weekend ahead, and I shall see you all on Sunday. Okay, that's it from me. Bye for now.